Welcome back. In this chapter, we'll be discussing emotion and interpersonal communication. So let's start with Stewie. Stewie here is very angry. He is in an emotional state. So I think it would be good to look at the difference between emotion and mood. Emotion is a person's state of feeling in response to a stimulus, resulting in physical and psychological changes which influence thought and behavior. So an emotion is generated by something. It may even be a perception of something which causes a heightened sense of arousal of some sort, and ultimately will influence thought and behavior. So Stewie here is angry. He appears to be about to yell, and he's pointing, and he's in a posture which indicates that he's about to become aggressive. And you better watch out for Stewie. Mood is a prolonged emotional state which may or may not be linked to a stimulus. And an example of mood is depression. And depression falls under a category of mood disorders when we get into psychiatry and counseling. So mood is just more of a longer state of emotion where emotion passes relatively quickly. We're not sure if Stewie's in an angry mood, but he's certainly experiencing anger, the emotion of anger here. Now the text breaks emotion into three different categories, and those are joyful and affectionate, hostile, and sad, anxious. And the picture I've included here has four categories of emotion, but happiness, love, passion, anger, contempt, disgust, jealousy, sadness, grief, fear, and anxiety. And these are some broad terms. I'm not really crazy about the way that your text has broken it apart, but it serves a purpose for examination. I think it would be helpful to explore the difference between simple sadness and depression. The word depression is commonly misused, and it's not that important to the average person, but to me as a therapist, I think it's important to have your verbiage straight here. So sadness is a negative emotion linked to some stimulus, and this is someone hurting your feelings, a relationship ending, perhaps somebody in your life passing away. All of these things could generate sadness. Usually involve crying and a sad mood, a desire for either more social contact or less, or we all process sadness in our own way. Whereas depression is more of a prolonged emotional state. We talked about mood already rather than just emotion, so mood is more of a long-term a more long-term experience. So depression is a state that has lasted for more than 2 weeks, and it's marked by significant symptoms including sadness, of course, disturbances in sleep and appetite, unwarranted guilt and remorse, decreased physical activity, even slowed motor activity. I worked with a client that moved very, very slowly, almost as if he had weights tied to his arms and legs, and it was because of a very significant clinical depression. It slowed him down immensely. It was pretty interesting from a clinician standpoint, but a withdrawal from normal activities and also a sense of hopelessness and doom. And so depression is a very significant thing. It may or may not be linked to some stimulus. Generally, we think of depression as being an entity in and of itself, frequently a chronic condition. Some depressions last years, and there is necessarily no outside cause for it. It could be purely the way that the brain is processing information, or the wiring of neurons within the brain could be leading an individual to be depressed. Also, improper balances of the different neurotransmitters. But anyways, that's more than we need here. But there is a big difference between sadness and depression, and just sadness is brief, whereas depression is more long-term and very significantly impairing. I think it would be valuable to explore the difference between fear and anxiety. And basically, fear is an immediate response to a threatening stimulus. And so this could be you hear a gunshot and you react with fear and you immediately get down. You try to avoid the threatening stimulus, if you will. Causes physical changes in our bodies to help us get out of a dangerous situation. These changes include increased heart rate and breathing, which can help us to run if we need to. Eyes will dilate, I think, to allow more light to be more sharp. Digestive process slows down. The release of stress hormones. All of these things will heighten our awareness to help us get out of danger. Anxiety is a chronic condition marked by clinically significant symptoms. We're talking about excessive, unwarranted worry about some future event. Now, phobia is a very specific type of anxiety. Something like arachnophobia, which is a fear of spiders, falls under the anxiety umbrella. Now, if there is a dangerous spider and it has jumped on you, you would have a fear response, which you would have a heightened sense of awareness to try to get the thing off you. Whereas with a phobia, as arachnophobia, it is a chronic long-term fear of being bitten by spiders or even in the presence of spiders, and it may induce a panic attack. It may cause the individual to have excessive worry, fear, or anxiety directed at bridges, a variety of things. Talking about social anxiety as well, fear of being around people or a worry of judgment. So anxiety is more of a chronic thing, whereas fear is more of a temporal, here for a short time just to help us to get out of harm's way. Now, the expression of emotions varies by culture and by gender. And so let's look at gender first here. Men and women, this is important, men and women experience the same number and variance of emotions. Now, this is a little controversial, but this is true. I've read this. This is not only in your text, but I have seen this in other places as well. The difference here is that each gender processes and communicates these emotions in different ways. So by processing, we're talking about a concept called emotional intelligence, which we'll be touching on in a couple slides. And then, by communicating, in an earlier chapter we discussed that men and women communicate their emotions in different ways, or even don't communicate in the case of men. And this is, we're speaking in broad brushstrokes here about the gender of men and women as we understand them here in the United States. So men and women feel the same number and variance, the same degrees of emotions. They just communicate them in different ways. And even poverty of communication, which means lack of communication, not discussing this, just kind of being silent with it. The norms for emotional expression also differ between cultures, and so in traditional Chinese culture there is a value placed upon moderation and emotional control, and so you will see more stoic individuals, less emotional reaction. Extreme emotional reaction is looked upon very negatively. And in contrast, traditional Mexican culture values people to be honest and express their emotions openly. I am Italian American, and certainly in Italian culture there is a lot more openness to expression and speaking with hands and all of this. So again, these are broad brushstrokes. Certainly not every Chinese or Chinese American person that you meet will fall within this, but we're talking about traditional cultural norms. So consider your own culture, your gender, and how that might impact the way that you express your emotion versus some other people that you know from different cultures or different genders. Emotional contagion is the tendency to unintentionally mimic the emotional experiences and expressions of others. I had an experience in the cafeteria in high school where somebody started laughing at a table, or two kids were laughing at a table, but they were laughing hysterically, and before long the entire table was laughing. And shortly after that, all the tables around them started to laugh as well. Nobody knew what we were laughing about, but the laughter just seemed to be contagious. It was and it was almost uncontrollable. It was just a spontaneous event that happened where everybody started laughing. I've included a link to a video here, which, as a warning, it may elicit positive emotions. You may have a reaction where you're unintentionally mimicking the experience of the individual in this video. So I encourage you to check it out. It's brief and it's pretty fun. You should have a couple laughs there. Enjoy it. Next, we'll discuss the topic of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is basically being able to understand your and other people's emotions. It's valuable in virtually all your interpersonal relationships, the ability to know and understand how you're feeling, or how your feelings may be impacting your perceptions. Women generally have higher emotional intelligence than men, and this could be attributed to the gendering process. It is more common for girls to be taught to understand what is going on inside of them with their emotions. They are also more likely to talk about these things, to be able to process, just because they tend to talk more about such things as they're gendered. This is some pretty broad brushstroke statements here, because certainly there are exceptions, but generally there is a pretty strong gender difference between this within this concept of emotional intelligence. Now, this image is a chart that I use sometimes in therapy for people who don't understand their emotions. They are low in that emotional intelligence we just discussed. And so you'll see all these different faces here with different expressions, and there's a number of them. And so, say I'm working with a client, I can pull this out if they're not sure how they're feeling. They don't have a word for it. They don't understand their feelings. I can pull this out and they can point to a face, and then we can go from there. And so, just a few thoughts here. It's important to note that our emotional reactions are based upon our perceptions. And so it's important for us to be aware of our perceptions of how we see things. Are we, in fact, experiencing things as they are, or are they tainted by some other experience or some preconceived notion within us? Our emotions are directly linked to our perceptions, to our thoughts. It's important to separate our emotions from our actions, learning self-control, the ability, especially with stuff like anger, the importance to understand the emotion as we're experiencing it, and to not allow it to dictate our behavior. And finally, I think it's helpful for everybody to work to increase your emotional intelligence.